Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Chris Dost here with my buddy Milo, who's helping me do my recordings today. In this video, we're going to continue our discussion of the definite article in Hebrew. Before we begin, however, I'd very much appreciate it, if you haven't already, to become a subscriber to the Aramaic and Hebrew comprehensive package on my Patreon channel. So for only $12 a month, you gain access to all of my Aramaic videos at the beginner, intermediate, and advanced level, as well as my Hebrew videos at all three levels, as well as some other Bible studies and various resources that I'm producing for language learners and students of the Bible. Milo and I very much appreciate your support in this endeavor. All right, let's get started. So in our previous two videos, we looked at masculine, singular, absolute nouns and adjectives in biblical Hebrew, as well as feminine, singular, absolute nouns and adjectives, with examples coming out of Jonah chapter 1. And you may recall that the feminine, singular, absolute forms that we looked at, we arbitrarily colored green just to easily identify them. And the masculine, singular, absolute forms, we colored yellow. Again, the colors are arbitrary. And we said that when we analyze Hebrew nouns and adjectives, and this is true for Aramaic as well, with only some very subtle differences between the languages, we have to analyze the nouns and adjectives for number, and by that we mean that they are singular, one instance of something, dual, exactly two instances of something, or plural, three or more instances. We also have to analyze nouns and adjectives for gender, masculine and feminine. So every noun and adjective in Hebrew will either be grammatically masculine or grammatically feminine. And then we have to analyze the nouns and adjectives for state. And so in Hebrew, we're either going to have absolute forms, definite forms, or defined forms, we could say, or construct forms. Now we've dealt with absolute forms, which we said are standalone forms, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes before an absolute noun or adjective, we have to supply the indefinite article, the English indefinite article, a or an, because Hebrew does not have an indefinite article. Today we're going to be talking about definite nouns and adjectives, and that is to say nouns and adjectives that have the definite article. Now, what we'll find out over the course of the next few videos is that there are different functions for the Hebrew definite article. Sometimes the definite article is used for reasons other than just supplying the word the before a noun or an adjective. In my Aramaic series, we saw that the very first case in the book of Daniel of the emphatic marker, which is roughly equivalent to the definite article, was used for direct address. And the same can be true at times in Hebrew. But that's for much, much later. For right now, when we deal with definite nouns, nouns that have the definite article attached, it is almost always going to indicate to us that we need to supply the word the in translation. Now in Hebrew, how to make something definite is a lot more tricky than the explanation that I'm going to give in this video. We need to keep things simple when we're starting out, and then we can add the complexities later on. All right, so how do we form the definite article in Hebrew? Well, first of all, we are generally going to see the prefix he at the beginning of the noun or the adjective. Generally speaking, there are plenty of exceptions to this, but when we are making a defined form, turning an absolute form into a definite form in Hebrew, we are going to generally put the letter he, or see the letter he, at the beginning of the noun and the adjective. Generally speaking, the vowel sign patach will appear beneath the he. And again, generally speaking, there are lots of exceptions, but we're not worrying about that right now. And then third, generally speaking, we will see a dagesh in the subsequent consonant. Generally speaking. So he with a patach vowel sign underneath with a dagesh in the following consonant. We're going to see lots of exceptions, and even some of those we'll see today. All right, let's look at an example of how we take an absolute noun and add the definite article to it. So melech is a masculine singular absolute noun, masculine singular absolute noun, meaning king or a king. Remember, sometimes we need to supply the English indefinite article in the translation. And how is it that we know whether to do that or not? Simply by context. We just have to pay attention to the context. But to take a noun like melech and add the definite article to it, here's what happens. We see a hey added as a prefix. Beneath the hey is the vowel sign patach. And in the first root letter, so following the hey, the first root letter is a dagesh, which historically speaking has a doubling effect. It's like the shadda in Arabic. So melech, king or a king, becomes hamelech, hamelech, which means the king, typically anyway. So let's go to Jonah 1 and review some of the masculine singular absolute nouns and adjectives and feminine singular absolute nouns and adjectives. So we see that in verse 3 we have onia, and we said in the previous video that the kamatz he suffix is a pretty reliable indicator that you're dealing with a feminine singular noun or adjective. And in this case, onia is a feminine singular absolute noun meaning ship. The phrase vayimtza onia means and he found a ship. And he found a ship, speaking of Jonah, of course. And in the translation, we render onia not just as ship, but a ship, because it wouldn't make sense in English to say, and he found ship. That's just not how English is spoken, and therefore that's not how the Hebrew should be translated into English. So onia, in this case, means ship. Now in verse 4, we have a feminine singular absolute noun. Okay, so we get the idea here with masculine singular absolute nouns and feminine singular absolute nouns. If you're not totally clear on them, I encourage you to maybe pause this video and go back and re-watch those two videos, writing out the examples as you go, trying to pronounce them out loud so that you get the hang of the basic concepts. But going back to the beginning of Jonah chapter 1, I want to start to look at some defined forms. So we're going to look at masculine singular nouns and adjectives and feminine singular nouns and adjectives with the definite article, Okay, so the first example here that we're going to look at is actually the second word, the word to the left in blue, gedolah. Now we've seen this before. Gedolah on its own is a feminine singular absolute adjective meaning big. But we don't just have gedolah here, we have hagdolah. And so it's gedolah, but you can see preceding it is the letter hey with a patach beneath it, and then a dagesh in the first consonant of the word gedolah itself. So it's got all three of the standard features of the Hebrew definite article. And so hagdolah is the expected feminine singular defined form of the adjective gadol. Gadol, the masculine singular, when put into the feminine, becomes gedolah. It has the kamatz he suffix. And then when it morphs from the absolute form to the defined form, we see that a hey, a patach, and a dagesh are added at the beginning. Now you remember, however, that I told you before that there are exceptions to these rules. And so look at the first word now, ha'ir. Ir, even though it may not look like it, is a feminine singular absolute noun when it's on its own, just ir. So how do we make it a defined form? Well, we add the hey, but wait a second, there's no patach underneath the hey, that's a kamatz. All right, so here we go, the Leningrad Codex, and Jonah 1 is going to begin over here. Obadiah comes to an end right here. There's a little Masoretic note, which we'll talk about some other time, and then we come to Jonah. Now we saw in verse 2 that we had the form hagdolah. This is the feminine singular defined form, feminine singular defined. And sorry it's a little pixelated here. I wanted to zoom in as much as I can, but it gets a little distorted, but hopefully you can see it anyway. It's easier to make out the letters. And you can see right at the beginning we have the hey and the patach, and then if you look in the gimel just to the left, you'll see a dagesh right in the letter there. All right, that does it for this video. In our next video, we'll continue our discussion of the definite article in Hebrew, so stay tuned. And if you have any questions or comments in the meantime, please be sure to share them on the Patreon channel. I look forward to hearing from you and to corresponding with you. All right, take care, everybody.